anything on Aberdeen, which is a city which I must say I have never been to and don't really understand very well.
You've never been to Aberdeen?
I've not. No, my sister went to university in Aberdeen, so I suppose that makes me a terrible heartless brother. But no, I've never gone up to the northeast, so it's a kind of rather mysterious territory for me.
Butteries are absolutely brilliant.
Oh yes, well my arteries have certainly had one or two of those cramped down them in the past. They're very, very tolerable. The old Aberdeen croissant.
Just before I come to Robin on this, people say, it's a serious political movement, we have to take it seriously. Can I just read you a couple of quotes from actual UKIP people? This was Chris Payne, the leader of the UKIP group in the Lincolnshire Council. And he wrote on Facebook, "Have you noticed that if you rearrange the letters in illegal immigrants and add just a few more letters it spells, go home, you freeloading, benefit-grabbing, resource-sucking, baby-making, non-English speaking bastards, and take those other hairy-faced, sandal-wearing, bomb-making, camel-riding, goat-fucking, raghead fuckers with you." This is
quite a few more letters in there.
Yeah, this is actually UKIP elected people. This is what we're facing here. It's not that they are just slightly opposed to the European Union and want to rearrange immigration policy. It's actually a fairly nasty group of people. Robin?
I mean, UKIP is the strangest political phenomenon I can remember, because it's a crazy party which is basically, it's kind of like a jelly which has had a suit of armour placed on it by the Daily Mail. If you go beyond the Daily Mail telling us over and over that this is an incredibly important political party, you'll discover it's not. And if it wasn't for the fact that the Tories are all now spooked, and so they're all now saying, "Oh, we've got to take this seriously," you actually don't. They're all mad. But they've had the free run. They've had the free PR. They've had the free newspapers. The Daily Mail has done this incredibly clever thing of for years saying they're a little bit mad, but they are quite right. Now, what's that? What's the aim of this? So the main purpose of UKIP now is to get the real main political purpose of UKIP is to get rid of David Cameron. That's what the mainstream media are using him for. Because to be quite honest, if they actually got any serious semblance of power, it'd be petrifying. And the kind of stuff that they say, you were saying at the beginning, we couldn't win Fauxrage round. I'm not so sure. I actually think that, to be quite honest, there's a big part of Fauxrage would now be quite happy just to see Scotland sail off into the North Sea, and they could become a proper English nationalist movement. And I'm going to say this and maybe shock some people. I've got no problem with English nationalism. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing. I don't like the brand of English nationalism we've got, and the hatred nationalism is a terrible thing. But I was speaking to a guy here, he's a bit obscure, but he was kind of talking with genuine passion about Anglo-Saxon tradition, about, this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but he really was talking about Morris dancing and real traditions of Morris dancing, and he spoke with great passion and great interest about an England which could really do with a revival, something that could really bring about. So I'm not in any problem at all with English nationalism. I just think it's a shame that we've got the English nationalism that we've got. So Fauxrage is a phenomenon which is kind of a unique, I think, in UK politics, which is a mentalist, a complete nut job, who has the total patronage of a mainstream media, and they're using him for one specific political purpose, which is to drag the whole of the British political debate off to the right. The problem is, how is the Daily Mail going to put him back in his box again? I mean, I really think they have in this one created the Frankenstein's monster. I'm not quite sure they're going to know how to control him properly. So I do think they've got a lot of worries. But I so hope he gets a hard time when he comes back up to Aberdeen again. It would just be such a wonderful thing if we could keep sending out the message that we don't want this kind of politics in Scotland.
Andrew, would you consider that abuse, or would you consider that constructed criticism when he comes back up, like Chris Hoy?
It'd be scandalous, and you could accuse him of going to private school as well, which is apparently not simply a kind of part of your biography, but an insult and a scandal to point that out. No, I mean it's I as I've said before, I like a bit of dog's abuse in our politics. I think there is a place for it. I don't think that we'll have to have this kind of quiet atmosphere of respectfulness when you encounter your Fauxrage. I mean, I was interested in Robin's point about English nationalism, because I think that's an issue which I find really interesting, and as you all know, I live down in England, and you get very interesting responses to it from very smart people. There is a sort of strain that I've encountered quite a few times, which sort of regards in a rather sort of superstitious way that the English nationalism as such has to be ethnically atavistic and all about white Britons, and that it's going to be racist and reactionary and thuggy, and it's all about food. And I just think that's sort of superstitious. Nationalisms are created; they're imagined communities. They're no less meaningful, because they are imagined. And to say that English nationalism is inherently always going to be racist, and therefore we have to desperately cling to the sort of smiling Janist face of British nationalism, seems to me just totally wrong-headed. And I think the emergence of England and thinking about Englishness and the language of Englishness is quite important. And I think from a left-wing perspective, and you see this in parts of the Labour movement down south, it's really important just to begin thinking and talking about England and not say it belongs to the skinheads, the thugs, and all the other racists and sundry other sort of wankers. And I think that's something which isn't really happening because of this idea that Britishness is the emancipatory nationalism.
I think it's really interesting that London liberals seem to really, really hate England. I mean, it's kind of like they have this sense that if there was England without Britain, it would be some awful, awful little country. And London liberals, I find that they must be in such a terrible position just now, because they desperately want to believe that Scotland's a backwards country and that all of our social progressiveness is somehow a sort of residual throwback anti-Thatcherism thing. And they can't get to grips with things like, we haven't torn the country apart over allowing gay ministers to come. We didn't even blink when they allowed women ministers into the church. The smoking ban came in here, didn't really cause that much of a hoo-ha. They've tried to say, well, Scotland isn't a proper modern liberal country, really. And I have this vision of liberals in London sitting in a little imaginary island where they have pushed so many people out of their liberal idyll. There's 4 of them standing in a little rock somewhere, and that they're saying, it's just the 4 of us now, we're the only ones left. If they let Englishness be dominated by the far right, then Englishness will be a bad thing. If they try to reclaim it, Englishness could and should be a very good thing. I am absolutely... The thing that I'm getting sick of, more than anything else in this independence campaign, is being accused of being anti-English. I don't have an outside of football finals, I don't have an anti-English bone in my body. I have never had the desire to batter an English person, to say something bad about an English person because they're English. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with that, nothing at all. And I have said, I've been, obviously, like everyone else, I've been speaking at events all over Scotland, and I've said the same thing at every event. This day the English people get a chance for their independence, if they give me a buzz, I will come down and I will put leaflets through any doors that they need a help with, because I think it would be a wonderful thing if they could have a proper debate about who and what they are as a nation. But the London liberal elite and the London elite generally aren't going to let that happen, because they're not really interested in a nation as a place where people live and exist. They just see the nation state as an entity for promoting economic and geopolitical purposes. And they're leaving us all behind.
I'd agree with the idea on English nationalism that you're both saying, or English independence, if you like. And even with Scottish independence, one of the best suggestions I've heard is once we're independent, we can drive Tony Benn up to lead the Scottish Labour Party to give him some backbone.
Well, I've got a very serious proposal that I've been suggesting for a while. I was at a meeting on writing a constitution. I would like to create a constitutional right of political asylum for English social progressives. I would like to build a big new town in Perthshire solely for the purpose of allowing English progressives who've suddenly realised there's something better than what they've got to come up and make their life in Scotland. I would like to throw open our doors to those in England who really do want a country like Scottish voters seem to imply that they want, and allow them to come up. So, I mean, we need to send out messages. This isn't... I watched 10 O'Clock Live, which I love. I think it's a wonderful programme, and it's good to have some political satire again. But the one thing they seem to all be utterly convinced about is this whole independence debate is about us not liking the English. That was the 70s. We are so over that, England. Please believe us. We felt bad about wearing kilts in the 1970s. Wearing a kilt, you saw someone wearing a kilt, and it looked like it was a statement, a point. And now you can have a wedding in Scotland. Everyone is twirling in a big, massive plaid, and they're perfectly comfortable with it. It's not an identity question, and it's not about England anymore. We got over that in the 1980s. This is something else altogether. And I wish someone would tell England. I wish somebody would phone them up and say, "Hey, England, this isn't about you.
Yeah, but even the tourists wear kilts at weddings now. But yeah, obviously I agree, more than welcome. But there is another side to this that I'm sure you've had this as independent supporters with an online presence. I'm sure you've had an online spat with a kind of confused English nationalist of what probably we'd be describing as the type we dislike at the moment. Like, for example, I've had people online saying to me, so you support Scottish independence, so what if England was to become independent? Wouldn't that be terrible? I was like, no, that's exactly what I'm hoping for. Good luck to you. Have you not had that kind of discussion at some point, Andrew? Especially living there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting about why and what purposes is served by this longevity of the anti-English story. And you get the occasional mad op-ed and opinionated article that says, well, of course it's all about anti-Englishness. And for those of us that know anything about Scottish politics, that's just a totally unrecognisable proposition. And anyone who follows the kind of mainstream pro-independence arguments will find nothing, no scrap of that, no hint of that. I mean, as we said last week, the only people talking about foreigners primarily are the Labour Party at the moment in terms of the independence debate. And I think one of the reasons why it gets a lot of purchases, firstly, because Scottish independence is very, very poorly understood as a political campaign in England in general terms. And secondly, by saying that it's anti-English, it really means you don't have to deal with the difficult issues about the British state and its choices. If you can say, well, this is just an atavistic ethnic project, something which you can just reject out of hand as sort of prima facie just outrageous and discreditable, then you really don't have to deal with the difficult questions about how we're governed, how we could be governed across the UK or in Scotland particularly. And I think there is a sort of self-serving ideological function about this insistence that it's all secretly really about anti-Englishness, whether or not we reference the English and talk about England at all in terms of the arguments we give for why independence would be good for Scotland and yes, potentially good for England and the rest of the UK too.
I think Empire's always done this. I still hear people talking about the Indian mutiny. What do you mean mutiny? It was a war of independence. And just before anybody emails me, I'm not equating Scotland with the undemocratically colonised India, but this has been a standard response forever, which is somebody who wishes to renegotiate a political settlement from those on the establishment side, the existing side. They can't be presented as having a reasonable suggestion or a reasonable idea. But you were asking earlier on, should we have a code about what is and isn't acceptable to say in terms of abuse? I'm just going to say this to anybody who happens to be listening who's in the Better Together side. I find being called anti-English it's so much more offensive, so much massively more offensive than possibly referring to Chris White went to private school, that I think they want to think about this. I think they want to talk about this, because if I started to call them anti-Scottish, they would go nuts. They would go ballistic. Please, Better Together and your people, stop it. Stop it now. It's a horrible, nasty, divisive and ridiculous thing to do, and I cannot understand how people who want to keep the UK together think a good strategy for doing that is to make the English hate the Scots and the Scots hate the English, because that's the outcome of this. If you set up a conflict between these people, that's what's going to happen. And I'll be absolutely clear, I have no problem with jokes. There must be some other joke about Scotland which isn't tramps. Surely there's a joke that a satirist in London can use about Scots other than that we're tramps. It's getting nastier and it's getting worse and it's being promoted, and the outcome of this, the long-term outcome of this, I'm not sure about, because it's going to make a lot of people feel hard to accommodate if there's a no vote. How do we pull this back together again if there's a no vote? So just pack it in. I mean this absolutely sincerely. I will never call a Better Together person a traitor. Stop calling me anti-English.
Okay, and I think that's a good point to wrap up for this week. So thanks for coming on, Robin. That was good.
You're more than welcome. Get back out and finish my gardening.
And I'll speak to you again next week, Andrew. Don't be going around calling anyone anti-Scottish while you're down there.
No, I don't think I'll be doing that very much. I'll just be going out and basking in the Oxfordshire sun like an appropriate internationalist nationalist that I am.
Cheerio.
Cheerio. See you later.
Bye.
Express yourself. Express yourself.